In 2014, Elizabeth Holmes was on top of the world. At just 30 years old, she was declared the world's youngest self-made female billionaire with a net worth of $4.5 billion. Her company, Theranos, was valued at $9 billion. Magazines printed her face on their covers. World leaders sought her advice. Yet beneath this glittering facade lay one of the most elaborate frauds in modern business history. This is the story of how a single entrepreneur fooled the world for over a decade. The dream that never was Elizabeth Holmes was born in Washington, D.C., into a wealthy, well-connected family. From childhood, she idolized Steve Jobs and dreamed of changing the world through technology. In 2002, at just 19 years old, she enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering. But like her idol, she had bigger plans. Within a year, Holmes dropped out and founded Theranos, a health technology company with an audacious mission: revolutionize blood testing. Her pitch was simple but incredibly seductive. Traditional blood tests required multiple vials drawn from a patient's arm, took days to process, and cost hundreds of dollars. Theranos promised something revolutionary. A single drop of blood from a finger prick could run over 200 medical tests. Results would come back in hours instead of days, and costs would be cut dramatically. The technology, she claimed, used a device called the Edison, named after Thomas Edison, the inventor who famously said he found 10,000 ways that wouldn't work before succeeding. The promise was so compelling that investors couldn't resist. Between 2003 and 2014, Holmes raised over $700 million. Major venture capitalists wrote massive checks. The Walton family, heirs to the Walmart fortune, invested heavily. Media mogul Rupert Murdoch pumped in over $100 million. Safeway invested $350 million to install Theranos testing clinics in 800 stores. By 2014, Theranos claimed partnerships with major pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline. The company was unstoppable. But here's the problem. The technology never actually worked. Behind the curtain, behind closed doors at Theranos headquarters in Palo Alto, California, a very different story was unfolding. The Edison machine, which Holmes had promised would revolutionize healthcare, was a complete failure. Former employees described components falling off during testing. The doors wouldn't close properly. The device would overheat and then freeze. Engineers tasked with adapting blood tests for the Edison machine reported they could not complete a single test accurately. Rather than admitting this to investors and business partners, Holmes and her business partner Ramesh Sunny Balwani made a shocking decision. They would fake it. The company secretly purchased commercially available blood testing machines made by companies like Siemens. Theranos employees would dilute the tiny fingerprick blood samples and run them on these conventional machines, not on the Edison device. The company was literally running an unauthorized medical experiment on real patients without their knowledge or consent. When important visitors came to Theranos headquarters to see the Edison device in action, the company staged elaborate deceptions. They created fake laboratory setups. Employees were instructed to conduct demonstrations that made the Edison look functional when it wasn't. The illusion had to be maintained at all costs. When Vice President Joe Biden visited the facility in 2010, Theranos executives orchestrated an intricate charade. Biden was told his blood would be tested on an Edison machine. Instead, employees took his sample, secretly sent it to a commercial Quest Diagnostics machine hidden elsewhere in the building, got the accurate results, and inserted them into the Edison machine to create the false appearance of functionality. The most brazen deception involved forged documents. Elizabeth Holmes sent emails to Walgreens executives containing a fake Pfizer validation report. The document made it appear that Pfizer had thoroughly tested and endorsed Theranos technology. In reality, Pfizer scientists had evaluated the company years earlier and concluded the opposite. They had recommended staying far away from any partnership with Theranos. But Holmes altered the documentation and attached Pfizer's logo to make it look like an official endorsement. Walgreens was so convinced by this fake document that they agreed to install Theranos machines in over 3,000 drugstores. The victims nobody talks about while investors lost hundreds of millions. And corporate partnerships fell apart. The real victims were everyday patients who trusted Theranos with their health. Between 2013 and 2015, nearly 1 million blood tests were performed using Theranos technology. Young lab technicians, some just out of high school, were processing these tests. One employee named Erica Chung, fresh from technical school, immediately noticed something wrong. Blood samples were producing contradictory results when rerun. Some patients tested positive for conditions they didn't have. Others received false negative results for serious illnesses. Chung watched in horror as inaccurate results were sent to real patients without any disclaimer or warning. Patients with false diagnoses received treatment they didn't need. Others missed critical windows for early intervention. One patient received a false positive for HIV. Another was incorrectly told they had cancer. Yet Theranos never alerted these patients that their results might be unreliable. The company simply pretended everything was fine. The unraveling the house of cards finally collapsed in October 2015 when investigative reporter John Carreyrou published a bombshell article in the Wall Street Journal. Drawing on interviews with whistleblowers like Tyler Shultz, the grandson of former Secretary of State George Shultz, who happened to sit on Theranos' board, Carreyrou revealed the truth. Theranos wasn't using its own Edison devices. The company was using commercial machines. The promised technology didn't work. Holmes' response was telling. Rather than admit the truth, she doubled down on the lie. She claimed Carreyrou had the story completely wrong. She told audiences that disruption always faces resistance, saying, "This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then, suddenly, you change the world." She even hired a prominent lawyer to threaten Carreyrou and the whistleblowers with massive lawsuits, attempting to intimidate them into silence, but the truth was too big to suppress. Regulatory agencies began investigating. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services found that Theranos' Newark laboratory posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. In June 2016, the FDA banned the company from using its core invention. Walgreens, which had invested $140 million and been preparing to install Theranos machines in thousands of stores, sued for fraud. The company was forced to void 2 years of blood test results spanning over 1 million tests. Theranos tried desperately to find a buyer, but no legitimate company would touch them. The legal reckoning on March 13, 2018, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission filed civil fraud charges against Elizabeth Holmes and Ramesh Balwani. The agency accused them of raising more than $700 million through an elaborate years-long fraud. They had exaggerated and made false statements about the company's technology, business, and financial performance. 3 months later, they were indicted on criminal wire fraud charges. The trial began in August 2021 in San Jose, California. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of the deception. Theranos employees testified about the fake demonstrations and the machines that didn't work. Financial analysts showed how Holmes had lied about revenues and partnerships. Whistleblowers detailed how patients were put at risk. On January 3, 2022, after deliberating for less than 3 days, a jury found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors. She was acquitted on charges related to defrauding patients and doctors. In November 2022, Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in prison. She was ordered to pay over $450 million in restitution. Her former partner Ramesh Balwani was convicted on all 12 counts and sentenced to nearly 13 years. Theranos dissolved in September 2018, and all equity investments were rendered worthless. The company that was once valued at $9 billion was worth nothing. The bigger picture, what makes the Theranos fraud remarkable, is that powerful people believed the lie. Henry Kissinger, James Mattis, and Betsy DeVos all joined the board or invested heavily. Yet Elizabeth Holmes fooled them all. The lesson isn't that smart people are gullible. It's that charisma and storytelling override critical thinking. Holmes dressed like Steve Jobs in black turtlenecks and spoke with visionary certainty. The story was compelling enough that people wanted to believe it. The venture capital industry was complicit. In the mid-2010s, over $5 trillion was available for investment. Investors were pressured to deploy capital quickly. Companies promising disruption without detailed scrutiny got funding. Theranos fraud happened in plain sight in magazine profiles and conferences. Due diligence was abandoned for flashy pitches. The scandal exposed the dangers of hype culture in Silicon Valley. It showed how easily powerful people can be deceived when big promises matter more than working technology. Holmes began her prison sentence in 2023, appealing her conviction despite overwhelming evidence. Her company dissolved. Investors lost millions. Patients received false diagnoses. The broader question remains, how do we prevent the next Theranos? We need to question charismatic founders more aggressively. We need technical proof before hype. We need board members with actual industry expertise, not just famous names. We need journalists willing to investigate rather than celebrate. Because as long as Silicon Valley worships narrative over reality, another Elizabeth Holmes waits to fool the world.